Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography. Today, we are going to be taking a look at South America. And in this particular section, we're going to kind of break South America up into two pieces. This first part's going to focus on Brazil and its neighbors. And in particular, for today, we're going to focus on Brazil. So what are we going to be able to do today? We're going to be able to describe the major physical and cultural traits of Brazil, including some of its major cities, its landforms, as well as the bodies of water, and a little bit about its history. We're going to go a little bit more basic for history this time around. So looking at Brazil, as far as total land area, Brazil is the fifth largest country in the world, but is the largest in South America. Its history is predominantly based on its colonization, which was done by Portugal. Portuguese is its official language, and I want to show you guys this. I'll come right back to the notes, but part of the reason why Brazil speaks Portugal is because of its past. So in 1493, the Pope, in order to help quell tensions between the Spanish and the Portuguese, creates the line of demarcation, which essentially said that everything west of that line could be settled by Britain, and then everything east could be more for Portugal. As far as the New World, well, you can tell by the 1493 line, well, that's unfair because Brazil gets nothing. So the new line was drawn in 1494, which is why the coast of Brazil becomes part of the Empire of Portugal. But predominantly what you'll see in South America is that there's a lot of Spanish influence here. So Portuguese, official language, also we'll talk about it, certainly the Portuguese role in its history. As far as the topography, the physical landscape, the Amazon River is found mostly in Brazil. It's the second largest river by total length, although some geographers argue that it's the longest, but it is the largest by total volume of water. So there's kind of a race or a bit between the Nile River and then the Amazon, depending on how you measure the river itself. And so it's the second largest. It runs from the Andes to the Atlantic Ocean and then drains the Amazon basin. The Brazilian highlands also to the south, as well as the Great Escarpment. Those are kind of some of your key physical features as far as the land goes. Physical geography. Looking at the economy, largely agriculture, mining, and of course forestry. The Amazon rainforest in Brazil is probably one of the most important resources for our planet, which is often why so many nations, including the United States and several countries in Europe, have a very vested interest in the industry in Brazil because the rainforest provides so much oxygen to our planet. It's often been called the lungs of the earth. And so there's a lot of interest in how that's managed, how it's preserved. Certainly you'll see bauxite, and you might recall that from our discussions on Jamaica. That's the material that goes into making aluminum. Certainly you'll see tin and iron ore, soybeans, tobacco, certainly grazing for cattle, coffee, and then, of course, some of the largest rainforests in the world, which provide a tremendous amount of lumber for the world, but also certainly are home to some of the most unique animals in the world. Looking at the major cities, these major cities tend to be about 200 miles apart, and so they're kind of scattered throughout Brazil. And a large part of that is the size of Brazil, but it's also certainly the physical landscape to do with the rainforest as well as the highlands. So looking at some of these, Rio de Janeiro is certainly among those largest cities, 11.2 million people, so gigantic. Certainly Sao Paulo is about 18.5 million. So again, these are massive cities. And certainly to put it in perspective, give or take, the size of New York City is about 8 million, which is the biggest city in the United States. So effectively, places like Sao Paulo are more than twice the size of New York City. So certainly designed, the designed city of Brasilia is the national capital and is home to roughly about 2 million people. So definitely not the same size as Rio or Sao Paulo, but certainly a large city. Now, with this large population come some economic challenges. About 20%, 1 in 5 or 1/5 of the population lives in what we would call extreme poverty. This is a poverty level that goes well below being able to afford your basic needs. And so many urban areas around these cities are surrounded by what are called favelas, which are slums, and they kind of become these kind of makeshift cities within these larger cities. A large part of the population, lives impoverished. You also certainly have violence in some of these areas, but you also have some really cool stories of people who find success, create this beautiful art, and so it really is very interesting phenomenon in Brazil. Certainly, again, like I said, being often considered the lungs of the earth, deforestation is also something that is of importance in Brazil. And so many efforts to preserve the Amazon rainforest have taken place throughout the years. And like we said, history, it's a little bit later in time compared to some of the others, but you're starting to see the colonization of the Portuguese in the 1500s at this time. To kind of wrap us up, getting a little bit more into some of the culture, government. Brazil claimed its independence from Portugal in 1822, and so became an independent country, but it's gone through quite a few changes. Up until about 1889, this country was ruled by emperors, and it's had a lot of transitions. And so today, Brazil is a democratic republic, very similar to the United States. They have a president, they have elected officials. But one of the things that's interesting about the republic is that people who are aged 18 to 70 are required to vote by law. They do have to vote in elections. And so it's a very interesting contrast to countries like the United States where it is optional. And what would our country look like if we made everybody vote? It's an interesting prospect to certainly think about. As far as leisure, everyday life, by far the biggest sport in Brazil is football. In fact, Brazil is a powerhouse for soccer. Pele and several other very famous soccer players have made their way or have come from Brazil. They're almost always a contender in the World Cup championships, and so it's no mystery why like Maracana Stadium is so full of spectators. In just Rio de Janeiro alone, it holds 220,000 people. So certainly a massive amount of people. It's certainly the national sport. And with good reason. I mean, they've had a lot of success even internationally. You also have festivities like Carnival. Again, very Christian nation, pretty Catholic nation. Carnival is celebrated before the beginning of Lent. So in order to celebrate before penance and restrictions are put in through Lent, you'll see these fantastic parades, phenomenal floats, costumes, Brazilian music. And certainly Rio has, in recent years, including 2016, hosted the Summer Olympics. And they've also, very recently to that, also hosted the World Cup, which is the championships, of course, for soccer. or football as the rest of the world would refer to it. So certainly Brazil is a very interesting collection of, it's unique in South America with the Portuguese influence over the Spanish influence. It's very well known for Carnival. There's no bigger celebration of Carnival than in Brazil. Certainly a country of tremendous culture. And so that's where we're going to wrap it up. So for my students, please make sure that you've been following along with the guided notes. For those of you who are just listening, I hope in some ways we're helping you to understand our world a little bit better. And that is going to wrap us up for this edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography. Have a great day, everyone.